welcome to our session today. If I could ask everybody to stay on mute, that would be fantastic. We've got a decent crowd joining us today. So if everyone can stay on mute just to avoid any background interference. I was going to say kids shouting, but I guess they're probably back at school in most cases. So welcome everybody. We'll just give it a minute or two as people arrive, sort out their tech. And as I've asked, if everyone can stay on mute, that would be fantastic. But welcome, thank you so much for got some great speakers and panelists lined up. But we'll just give it a minute or two as people arrive, get settled, sort out their tech. Already up to 125 people. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Although, as ever with any kind of live webinars, we're not going to have everybody able to join us live. So we will be sending a recording of the session out to those that haven't been able to join us live. So if I can ask everybody, Sammy, was that you not muting yourself? Dear. Hi, Sammy. Sorry. Good to see you. Yeah, if everyone can just keep themselves on mute. Good to see a few familiar faces. Hey, Lee, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. If everyone can stay on mute, just avoid any background interference. Just give it a minute or two. Now, feel free, if people want to keep their cameras on, that's fantastic. It's always lovely to see the whites of people's eyes, but equally, if you don't want to, that's equally cool. I understand I've got some decorators knocking around today, finishing off a job that was delayed 18 months ago and is now leapt back into action. So I'm trying to avoid the workmen that are outside my house now doing a bit of painting. But welcome everybody. So I'll just give it another minute or so just as people are arriving. As I said, we are recording the session, so we will be distributing this to those who registered that can't attend live. But I do think this is going to be a fascinating discussion. Thanks everyone for joining us. Well, we might just make a gradual start. I'm sure people will continue to arrive. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the second of our leadership lunch and learns. Last month, actually, we looked at managing remote teams. I think something that is going to be a feature of pretty much all of our lives going forward. We did a poll, actually, a really interesting poll that shows that even after the pandemic is over, the vast majority of people are anticipating they're not going to be in the office 5 days a week, but they're not going to be at home 5 days a week either. There's going to be this kind of hybrid, probably 2 or 3 days a week. People will be in the office 2 or 3 days a week at home. So I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic for all of us in terms of how we, manage teams that we work with, how we manage our relationships with each other. I know we've got a couple, actually. We had a fascinating discussion last month. I think I've seen Louise at Green King and Simon at AstraZeneca joining us, so coming today. And in fact, last month was I think a record attendance for one of our employer events. So we'll see if this month manages to match it. But we did take some notes from last week. So I don't know if one of my colleagues might be able to drop a link in the chat box for the resources that we created. It was a really fascinating discussion. We've done a bit of a summary, and there is a link to the recording of that session. So it looks like Chloe, thank you, Chloe, has just dropped that into the chat box. Well worth having a look at if you are going to now be in this world of remote and kind of hybrid teams. And actually for today, we're going to be hearing from some really interesting speakers over the next sort of 60, 70, 80 minutes. I'm very interested actually in everybody's ideas. I think we've all had our own experiences, all had our own, reflections on resilience over this last year, I know, I've always considered myself to be a resilient individual, and this has tested me beyond anything I've ever experienced. And actually, I looked in the dictionary earlier at what resilience is in the dictionary, and it says it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And in fact, psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma. Now, actually, I personally disagree with that now, because actually my business actually done pretty well over the last year, but I've still found it one of the most challenging, hardest years I've ever faced. And I think this last year has really shown that growth and success, that adaptation and pivoting, one of the words of the pandemic, but that brings its own challenges, the same as, when things are going downhill. In fact, we've seen almost an alphabet of descriptors of the economic impact of the pandemic. I remember back at the beginning, they were talking about a V recession, then there was a U recession, there was a W recession, there was the dreaded L recession. I remember even the Nike swoosh was talked about a lot, but the one I hear most recently actually is K-shaped economy, both now and potentially for the near future. This idea, and I hear this with my client base actually, that as many organizations are twice as busy as they've ever been, as are really struggling and really suffering and have sort of dropped 90%. Actually, I think both ends of that K-shaped economy brings its own challenges, its own stresses, and requires its own levels of resilience. So we thought it was a suitable topic for us to discuss. I think it's something, like I said, we've all got our own perspectives on. So please use the chat box throughout the course of this webinar. Any of your own thoughts, please throw them into the chat box. We do kind of capture the chat box to actually add to the archive that we create. And often it's the input from our audience that's as interesting as our speakers, albeit we've got some fantastic speakers lined up. So we're going to be hearing later from, we've got Lucy Pakes from Ashton's HR Consulting, who actually talks a lot about resilience. Really looking forward to hearing from Lucy. We've got Dove Jenkins from New Development, former background with organisations like BGL Group, Barclaycard. Again, now talks a lot about resilience, both for individuals and teams, because I think the two are quite different. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Caroline Ford. Been through a bit of a roller coaster herself, I think, over the years, going from BGL, which was growing very rapidly. BGL, if you don't know the brand, is Compare the Markets, one of their, the meerkats that we all love so much. That's one of their brands. But, from BGL actually into Thomas Cook through the last sort of couple of years of that business, and then actually into AstraZeneca over the last 18 months, which has just been phenomenally busy. So, really, I don't know, out of the frying pan into the fire, perhaps. I'm really interested to hear from Caroline later. Going to hear from Doug Field, who's actually a member of my own institute, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, also chief executive of East of England Cooperative. I'm sure that industry, retail shops has seen some incredible changes over the last year and had to deal with, both ends of the kind of K-shaped economy. Really delighted to be joined by Charlene Lyons, actually Chief Executive of Black Sheep Brewery. And in fact, I haven't even told Charlene this, but one of my very, very first ever jobs, I was an auditor when I was training, and one of my very first jobs was auditing a food manufacturer in Massam. And I used to pop every lunchtime, not very professional, but every lunchtime, I think if I remember rightly, would it be the King's Head in Massam's, I think, Charlene, where I would pop and I would have a pint of Black Sheep, and I've actually always had a soft spot for the beer ever since. And I'm guessing your last 8 days has been rather hectic since the reopening of the pub, so it'll be great to hear from Charlene. But we're actually going to start hearing from somebody I've worked with before, and I think is just a fantastic inspiration. But I'll hand it to a first speaker.
Lovely, thanks Gareth. Welcome everyone, good afternoon. Great so many of you are able to join us. So resilience for me, I think, has been a word that has become more and more used over recent years. Didn't used to really hear it much, and then particularly in very recent times, as we're coming out of possibly one of the toughest 12 months that both personally and professionally people have had to deal with. The idea of having resilient individuals that are supporting each other in resilient teams has become more and more popular, more and more important. And I think as the world opens up, Gareth mentioned there, this sort of change around. Some businesses are going to be going from 0 to 100% overnight, whilst others perhaps are going to be much slower in the recovery, or may even be delayed. So we're facing quite opposite ends of challenges across different businesses. We're going to come back with some more questions in a little bit, but we're just going to have a little chat with some people that we have who have joined us, as Gareth introduced earlier. So I was going to start by talking to Doug, actually. Doug, I've got a question for you. So you're from East of England Cooperative, and you've been responsible for some very diverse business areas who will have been impacted by the pandemic in very different ways. So I wonder if you could just give us a bit of insight on how this has impacted your teams and how you've managed these different teams through this time. Oh, I'm not sure.
I haven't got audio for you, Doug. To be one, didn't they?
Let's see if that's going to let you join. I'll come back to you in just a moment, Doug. Let me ask Charlene a question in the meantime. So Charlene, so Gareth introduced you. You're a management consultant, and you're currently CEO of Black Sheep Brewery, who have really had quite an uncertain, a very turbulent time, I would imagine, over the last 12 months. So could you tell me a little bit about how your business has managed to cope with these kind of immediate changes taking place?
Of course, hi, thanks for having me. Well, coronavirus has been heartbreaking and hideous in many ways for many people, you know, personally, professionally, it's not been easy. And I think that the single biggest thing that we did was we were quick to change. I think that's really important. We very quickly found out that pretty much 90% of our trade was turning off overnight as pubs closed. I mean, we sell to supermarkets, so that was fine, but we didn't have any other presence at all. We had no online presence, and as I said, pubs were shut. So we very quickly had to think on our feet as to what we could do. We had massive fixed costs. We had, you know, brewery, which was fully operational. We had a huge number of staff that we employed, over 150. So, you know, they were reliant on us and looking at us, the leadership team, the senior team, for kind of direction, what was going to happen. So in a nutshell, really, you know, we took advantage of the furlough scheme, and we made choices. And I think in life, you know, life is about choice. It's not always going to go your way, but we leapt, we hoped we could fly, and we did. And I think that, you know, we won against the odds, but we chose the right path, and we chose a carefully kind of considered path. So we diversified, we changed our business model. We set up an e-commerce business pretty much overnight. So from selling nothing, we were doing 250, 300 orders a day. So we had people in and shipping out beer up and down the country, as far as, you know, Scotland, right to Dorset. And I think that, you know, we took advantage of the situation in whatever way we could. We did a brew to you service. We started doing food deliveries. We took advantage of our incredible brand and told supermarkets that we had loads of stock and we were available, and we wanted to, you know, to get it into their depots. But if you remember, very early days, you know, there was that bum fight for toilet roll and for rice and for flour and for all of the basic supplies. So supermarkets didn't want to fill up their warehouses with beer and, you know, non-essential goods. So it was very challenging to manage the logistics and the distribution plans. So I think, you know, there's been lots of changes. We made good choices. We engaged our people. We engaged our customers. We changed our focus, and we've kind of emerged in a place whereby we've learned an awful lot of things. You know, we've learned about our relevance. We've learned about the strength of our brand. We've learned that we can be industry leaders. We can be forward focused, and we can be forward facing. You know, we might not be as big as Heineken, but we're certainly not as small as the microbreweries, and we've got a place, we've got a voice, and we did whatever we could. And as I said, you know, we adapted, we changed, and we've kind of emerged. We're here now. Pubs are open, thank goodness, which is brilliant. You know, hopefully you're all going to the pub or to restaurants and taking advantage of not having to cook yourselves. But, you know, this is the beginning. As we start to re-emerge, this is the beginning of the next phase, and it'll be very interesting to see how things pan out. A lot of pubs and restaurants still aren't open because commercially it's not viable, and you know, many places will never reopen. I think, you know, there's statistics that state that there are significant numbers of, you know, local licensees can't afford to reopen their doors quite simply because they've had no government support. So it's challenging times ahead.
So Charlene, can I just chip in, because we're going to return to Eddie and talk a bit about personal resilience kind of later in the session, but I'm quite interested in that piece around team resilience, and you talked about, you know, particularly engaging your people, and I just wondered if you've got any thoughts, because obviously your teams will have faced huge uncertainty and huge changes in what they're having to do, perhaps from day to day. Any thoughts on, you know, helping your teams be resilient in that sort of situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and people are at the forefront of our business, like they're at the forefront of most people's businesses, and for us, our people are everything. We engage with our people at every opportunity because people are what make a difference. People create success. You can't do it on your own, and for the majority of our staff who've been furloughed for a very long time, they found it really difficult to re-emerge back into this business that looks and feels completely different to the business that they left. And that's a real challenge for us as managers and leaders, and for them as individuals, because their roles are different, that, you know, their functionality is different, their outputs are different. So we've really worked hard with people throughout COVID, when they were furloughed and since, to help them to challenge the norm. And we've kind of given them lots of tools and props to help them to understand that actually your role is your role, the output is the output, whether or not you work from home, whether or not you work from the office, whether or not you work from the forecourt of the car garage when you're having your MOT done, it doesn't matter. We've helped people to understand that they are our biggest asset. So we've given them the tools that they need to be able to have that confidence. We've invested a lot in training and development throughout COVID. Most of our teams have had, you know, mental health, social well-being, and specific kind of sales or finance related training as per the department requirements. We've done a lot of work with growth mindset and helping them to take control. And we've educated people and helped them to understand that the culture of the business is different, the culture of society is different. This is a global thing. It's not just our business in Masson, it's everyone, everywhere, everything. And together we're stronger, better together, your best is good enough. That's really, really important. They're just words, but actually we put them into practice a lot, and people do believe their best is good enough. If they're struggling, they're struggling. We've also done a lot of work actually, which has been brilliant, on values, because we've used this as an opportunity to reassess what our company values are. Why do people want to work for Black Sheep? Why do we want people to work for us? What do they mean? Do you want to wear shorts in the summer? Do you want, you know, days off on your birthday? What really matters to you? And amazing things are coming out, like enrichment allowances. So we're starting to do things like, at a certain level, if you earn it, if you hit your targets, give people allowances to have singing lessons because it will enrich their personal and professional lives. There's all sorts of amazing things that businesses can do to help and support people, and actually not all of it comes down to finances. So there's all sorts of things that, you know, as I said, we've done and we continue to do, and we're part of big networking groups, and we encourage our staff to work with people in other businesses as well, and that's free. And that whole kind of network, peer-on-peer support is so vital and has proved really successful so far.
Really taking that, being very flexible to and supporting, managing people through a whole range of changes, not just within the business, but sort of in everything that's
and overcoming that kind of almost that COVID fatigue, because people are fatigued, people are tired, and people are drained. And I was saying before, you know, even the people that have come back from furlough, they're exhausted. They've been with us for 2 weeks, and you know, it's very difficult to do that kind of full-time job. So having that bit of flexibility and having that ability to be able to communicate with one another and be honest and open, and actually you get so much more out of your staff and your teams by just having that kind of culture whereby they can talk openly. Having a bad day, but you know, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Excellent. I think Doug, can I just check, is your sound?
I hope so.
Yes, we can hear you now. Fantastic. So I will come back to you to tell us a little bit how you've sort of involved and managed your teams as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So we've got 4,300 colleagues. So we've been affected very differently in terms of that. Our food store's been open throughout the pandemic, experienced that sort of panic buy-in from the toilet roll warriors that Charlene mentioned, and gone through a whole range. We've had our travel business, which has been basically closed and furloughed, and they've had to deal with refunds. It's a sort of negative territory. And we've had a funeral business who's had a very mixed sort of having to deal with people who've lost loved ones in very, very difficult circumstances. But right from the outset, I think what we've done is we recognised, as Charlene said about people, and as Eddie mentioned about people, will look back at how we've treated them in this period. So we've very much taken that sort of people first approach. And we also recognise that, you know, we've got 4,300 people, we've got them spread over 200 locations in Norfolk, Suffolk and North Essex, but everyone's different. You know, I heard sort of quite early on that everybody's unique. We might be in the same storm being COVID, but we're all in different boats. And we had to recognise that. So we've had to think about how we can support our line managers, how we reach people who are suffering in silence, because it's, you know, it's the people who tell you they're suffering. That's great, you can help them, but it's how do you find those people who are suffering in silence? So we've done a lot. We'd already had a big journey. We've done a lot of supporting and creating that language about well-being, and trying to reach those people. We've done weekly videos about how much we value those people. And you know what's been really good out of the pandemic is what people have valued in terms of what's been a key worker, the NHS, the food store people, food store retailers, and you know it's not necessarily always some people there. And we've sort of promoted customer letters, and we've done events for our members as a cooperative. We've got member based, and we've done resilience events, but really tried to and we're doing now in a partnership with Suffolk Mind about how we make sure we increase knowledge of well-being. We use a shared language, and we sort of raise awareness of all the support that's available. And we've got a lot of support available, but it's about at the point in time it's needed, and not, you know, you can do lots of training, but you know, it's about that moment in time when you really need it, that we've got to make sure it's there.
I really like that point about we're all in the same storm, but everyone's in different boats on it. So recognizing kind of what it is that your team needs, what it is that those individuals in the team need. So it could be very different between different areas of your business, or between different individuals. Lovely. And Dovrig, so Dovrig Jenkins, founder of You Developments, and you've got a wealth of experience working with leaders and businesses. So how can you as a leader manager support your team coming out of very turbulent times? What would be your advice?
Thanks, Crystal. I just want to say that no matter what your job is, it's really nice to come on these events and actually just be kind of re-energized and re-engaged by the stories that we've heard, because I think what's really important to kind of underline before we go any further, I think, you know, resilience is a big subject, as we all know, because that's why we're all here. But also as well, it's getting very, very close to being a management cliche already, you know, because you have to be resilient. It's been around for a long time. I think what we've, you know, heard already from Michael and Charlene and Doug, and I'm sure that people will follow me as well, as, you know, this is all about people, you know, ourselves as business owners and business leaders, but ultimately we are dealing with human beings, and like Doug was saying, I like that metaphor as well, you know, about being in the boats, and everybody's got a different perspective on this because everybody's circumstances are individual. I've just got one slide to share, really, just to, so I'm just sharing my screen. Is just one slide just to share with everybody on this topic, maybe about, which is not going to do now because it's in a, oh, there we go, it's just a bit slow loading. So this is something that I created just last week. I read an article from Deloitte, and it's quite a long article, and I'm not going to read it all now because it would take another half an hour. But in summary, the article was talking about kind of coming out of dealing with and then coming out of the circumstances that we've all had. So, you know, there's lots of commonality, there's lots of individual circumstances here as well. The summary from the Deloitte report was, as we come out of a crisis, they've identified 3 different areas. So as you can see on the screen, It's got, first of all, how do you respond to a major crisis, whether it's a pandemic or anything else. So actually, how do you deal with the situation and manage the continuity of the organisation? So, really good story from Charlene and how the breweries managed through that, and from Doug as well. So the initial response, now none of us have the luxury to deal with, actually, let's sit down and think about how we're going to do this, because crises don't play out like that. So, sometimes it's just like roll up your sleeves and get on with it. But what's really important as we go into this stage is start to think about then, actually, let's have a bit of time. And I know this can be a luxury, going back to what Charlie was saying, suddenly the pubs are open, we've got 2 weeks to turn everything around and get beer back out into the supply chain again. But, for the other businesses, like Gareth said earlier, sometimes there's a longer lead in time. So, if you do have the luxury of that, it's actually then starting to use that time quite wisely. So start to think about, as you come into the recovery phase, which hopefully we all are now, is actually now, how do we learn and emerge stronger than we were before? Yeah, because of course it's different. And the reality is we're not going to go back to anything that happened pre-2020, because the world is now quite a different place, and it is going to be for quite a long time. So first of all, how do we respond? Secondly, how are we learning about what we've done, what worked well, what didn't work so well, and then actually now start to think about what can we do now to thrive in this new environment, whether it's sport or, in funeral care or brewing beer, whatever it might be. So how are we going to thrive? Because there are lots of opportunities. And we all know that there are businesses that fell over quite quickly during COVID, have done since, and will continue to as well. So it's really important to think about actually surviving now. And a lot of us been in survival mode for the last 12 months, but now how do we thrive in this new environment? So off the back of this report, it kind of stimulated my thought as a facilitator to think, actually, so how could a leader of a team or a business owner start to kind of facilitate that consultation? Because what I've heard, especially with Doug and Charlene as well, is actually started to think about talking with your people, engaging your people, have that consultation, because everybody at different layers in the organisations or the different parts of your organisation are going to have a different viewpoint. And different viewpoint from around the board table as well. So I've just created this, and Crystal's already got a copy of this. So I'm really happy for you to send this out to everybody as a free resource. Maybe just as a very simple way of actually start to consult with and engage people actually. So, where have we come from? Where are we now? And where can we go to, so that we all thrive in the future? So, of course, being a facilitator, we love our quadrants. It's either going to be a quadrant or a pyramid, because that's the way that our brains work. So on the top left-hand side, in the first quarter, if you like, it's going back to what Deloitte described as the respond. So what do we change, but also understanding the why. Everybody talks about the why question these days. So what did we change and why do we do that? Have that reflection, have the different perspectives, the different realities of people in that conversation. The recovery area is the top right-hand side. So actually start to think about what worked well, because it's very easy now we're getting to the recovery stage that we're all very future focused and we don't always learn about what's worked well, but also importantly, what didn't work well and why did things work well and why did things not work so well. And again, you'll have support teams, you'll have operational teams, you'll have the leadership team, you'll have different perspectives. So gathering up some of that information. And then when we start to talk about thrive then as well is, so what changes shall we keep? So there'll be things that we've created or adapted very, very quickly in the last 8 months or so. So which one of those things should we keep, because it's now working in this new environment that we're working in? But also as well, what should we go back to pre-COVID? That worked really well, but because of COVID, we've had to put on ice for a little while. But also, why should we go back to that? But then also that question about continuous improvement, is there a better way of doing that or a slightly different way of doing that, because now the context is different. So hopefully, just have those conversations at a team level, a leadership level, operational level within organizations. It's just that hopefully that's a useful framework to help people think about, as a team, how do we maintain a level of resilience, maintain that in the future, but then also maybe thrive and be better than stronger, more productive, more profitable than we were 2 years ago.
Oh, thanks, Dov. That's a really useful framework, actually. I can see that easing its way into an FI SMT meeting at some point. And I love the sort of positivity of the respond, recover, thrive message, taking the best from what we've all learned. I wonder if I might come back to Doug actually now. I mean, making sure that managers are equipped and capable of supporting their teams, I imagine, has been really important. I mean, are there any things you've particularly done? Any advice on that front you can give?
Well, Gareth, we actually started that a couple of years ago. We had a big managers conference, and we got in a clinical psychologist, a sportsman from Ipswich Town, a nutritionist from the UEA, and also someone from Ipswich Building Society, and looked at the whole spectrum of well-being, about financial, sports, nutrition, the thoughts, behaviour, body, feelings, that sort of hot cross bun. That's on the grid, isn't it? I could start working for Diffrig as well. And there's all that those type of areas. We started that journey, and we continue to support it. We've got an online learning platform where we continue to do that well-being and continue to encourage it. It's all about having the conversations. It's all about, they know their people better than we do, and it's about trying to work out what's unique about what challenges they're facing. And what we're doing, we're part of our partnership with Suffolk Mind, which going forward now, is really aimed at that real cohort of people to make sure they feel equipped, because it's very scary to talk about feelings and emotions with people, and it's not natural for a lot of people, and it's hard to do, isn't it? So it's a hard thing to do, and we've got to keep working on it. It's a never-ending journey, and very much trying to support them as we do that.
Fantastic, thanks, Doug. And actually, I wonder if, Charlene, if I could bring you in, because one of the phrases I've heard most often in the last year is, we'll get through this together. I think it was even mentioned earlier in this session. And, collaboration across different businesses, across sectors, across industry seems to have been a really important part of people pulling through. And I certainly hope going forward into a recovery, that's going to be a key pillar to creating a sustainable and equitable recovery across localities and sectors and age demographics. I'm just wondering, have you got any experience of almost sectoral resilience and, people pulling together across organisations?
Yeah, sure. So I guess probably one of the best examples is when pubs closed in March for the very first time, March 2020, it very quickly became the brewers' responsibility to uplift all of the unused casks and kegs from the cellars. So every single delivery that we'd made the week before, that obviously of unused stock, we needed to collect. Now, that was an amazing example of collaboration between brewers large and small, and understanding how we could work together to support customers and support licensees to be able to ensure that they didn't have the worry of this unused stock in their cellars when they were going to be closed for the foreseeable. I mean, for those of you that don't know, if cask and keg product is left for a very long time, it can potentially explode. So we didn't want exploding casks and kegs in people's cellars. So we had the financial burden actually, and the logistic, bearing in mind the majority of people were furloughed, of collecting all of that unused beer and then kind of destroying it. But you can't just pour it down the drain. I mean, it has to be done carefully, otherwise we'd have Yorkshire Water and every other knocking on our door. So that was a really good example of collaboration between industry. And we've also done a lot of lobbying and a lot of work together, the One Voice for Brewers, the parliamentary beer groups, to actually help, because brewers have had no support from the government at all. Pubs have, brewers haven't, and that's pretty similar in terms of the supply chain. So if you think of all the pizza restaurants being closed in the whole of the UK, and then the companies that literally make pizza dough, only pizza dough, not getting any support, it kind of doesn't make any sense. And we've had nothing. So we've done a lot of work together to try and get some of the basic support that that's been offered in Scotland, in Ireland, in other European countries, but we haven't been successful just yet. But that's been a real amazing act of togetherness, because we've worked with people across various different kind of size breweries and sectors. And I guess the other thing is that every business has had their own COVID crisis to deal with. And I think that that's not just breweries, that's everything and everyone. So there's been areas where, businesses that have had to lock down, or that, have had departments isolating. So, for example, we didn't until recently have our own packaging line. We've just finished we've just completed that, and it's now up and functioning. But before that, we were reliant on third-party packages. And one of our packaging suppliers, our main packaging supplier, in April, when we were hitting our busiest time with off-trade sales, told us that they couldn't package for us anymore. That would have basically meant we had zero revenue, zero income at the time. So basically, what we would need to do then is we needed to work with other suppliers, other contractors, other third-party packages, and we worked with our own network and said to other competitors, who do you use? Have you got any spare slots? And it was a real act of working together in collaboration. So some really positives and some real kind of amazing stories of how competing businesses within the same industry working together to create whatever this new normal is. And I think there's lots of learnings that will come out of that.
I certainly think so. I mean, I think and it's not just the COVID pandemic. I think with Brexit, even the Ever Given, that ship in the Suez Canal, I think it's really exposed the fragility of global supply chains. And I hope there's big opportunities for, local supply chains and for local businesses to really support each other. But fundamentally, economic resilience is going to be based on sectoral resilience, which will be based on organizational resilience, based on team resilience, which we've been talking about, but that's got to be based then on individual resilience, particularly of the leaders who, I'm a big believer, you can't make your teams resilient if you're struggling yourself. So, we're going to, move on to a bit of a discussion about individual resilience.
So we're going to go back to a few people who joined us on the first panel there with answering some questions, and a few other people that we've got with us today as well. Some individuals who have really shown drive and drive and determination when things have been sort of difficult in their careers. And firstly, I'd like to go to Caroline. So Caroline Ford, who's with us, she's had an incredible career so far, and has certainly had to cope with quite a lot of change and had to be able to adapt. So Caroline, you've been presented with some very different job roles, and at times even needed to transfer to a different sector.
Indeed.
How do you keep going through that? How do you continue to show up to work?
Yeah, that's it's tough, sometimes it's really tough. I mean, I wanted to be a ballerina. I ended up working in insurance. That's how life goes sometimes. And I'd spent I went to boarding school at the age of 10, to performing arts school, and then on to college, and continued with that study. And two things came to me when I graduated from that. One, I really wasn't, I wasn't tall enough. I couldn't really do anything about that. B, I probably wasn't as talented as some out there in the marketplace, although you could argue with more determination and grit. If I'd been really passionate about it, I probably could have overcome that one. But it didn't pay well either. So, that was the killer for me. And I thought, well, at the age of 21, what am I going to do? And I remember my dad saying to me, well, businesses need secretaries. So I went to night school and learned to type. And that was my plastering, really. That was my plan B. And I hadn't ever thought, I'm going to be a typist, I'm going to do this. But over time, I learned that actually that skill was probably the most valuable skill that I've ever learned. It doesn't matter what job I've worked in or what industry, I have my typing plastering to fall back on. But I worked in insurance, and at the time, contact centres were on the rise, call centres, and my mum, God bless her, went to the job centre regularly and came back with tickets for me to say, you need to get a job. So I went, I applied, I worked in insurance, and I actually qualified in insurance because I'd left school, vocational school, with 5 GCSEs, nothing else. I'd done no science at school whatsoever because it was a vocational school. I didn't do A-levels. I certainly didn't go to university. And so, if you looked at me on paper, you would say that the odds were really, truly stacked well against me for academia. But I thought, well, insurance, they do these exams in insurance, and you can work and do your qualifications, distance learning at night school. And so that's what I did. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity, I'll do that. And during the time that I worked in insurance, and I've been in the insurance industry for many years, I actually went through 6 mergers and acquisitions in 9 years. And eventually, at the point that I got married, my husband just said, this is ridiculous, because you're either always chasing redundancy, trying to keep one step ahead of the game, or integrating into a new organization. Why don't you have a look and see if there's something else you could do? And I'd specialized in learning and development within the industry that I was working in. And I kind of, all of a sudden I looked up and I thought, well, maybe my skill set isn't industry specific. Maybe it is transferable. And I had aspirations to work as a management and leadership development consultant. I'd done that within my own industry. The next step for me was thinking, well, perhaps I could be a management consultant. Perhaps I could get into an organization that would give me opportunity to get some breadth outside the industry that I worked in. Maybe I could give that a go and also get a step up in my career. And it worked. I got this opportunity. I was absolutely scared stiff that, you know, someone would find me out. They would know, right? That whole imposter syndrome about what do I have to bring to the table? Are they going to listen? Do I add value? And I learned a couple of things while I was working in consultancy. One was you're only as good as your last interaction with a customer or a client. That was a really big lesson for me. You don't get many second opportunities if you don't make a really good first impression and work well with people. And the other thing was really about learning how to show up to work and around staying positive. And one of the things that this particular company did a lot of at the time was neurolinguistic programming. So all about behaviors, how you show up, how you conduct yourself, understanding that the map is not the territory and all this good stuff. And, you know, the first time I went there, they asked me how I was feeling. I said, yeah, I'm fine. They said, no, that's not acceptable in this organization. You need to be good or great. And so that was another really important lesson for me about how to show up and interact with people, that actually people love interacting with people who feel good, who project positivity, who give them a good feeling and a view that things are possible, I guess, to Eddie's points earlier, really. And so I learned that that was a really good way to show up to work, and that would help me meet people and integrate well, but also that, you know, it would really help me get future opportunities because I was a good, nice person to work with, or tried to be, and that I offered value. And so that's really stood me in ever such a good stead when adversity is hit. My goodness, it's hit many times, but just having that mindset, having that knowledge, that capability, and thinking I can always go back to being a PA or doing something. I have a really good skill set, but also the courage to say my skill set is transferable into any organization. So I feel more confident because of that. Crystal's, it's simple things sometimes.
Definitely, and remaining positive and taking
For sure.
your experiences forward, taking that next opportunity.
Yeah, so it's that kind of what's the worst that can happen mindset.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, someone said, you know, the other day, asked about, well, what do you class as luck? And they said it's where opportunity meets preparation. You know, it's that kind of, if you've got a really good skill set in your backpack, things you can unpack and use in one organization, pop back in there, something else you can take out somewhere else, it gives you that confidence, the toolkit to be flexible, to know that, you know, if you need to work in a different sector, in a different organization, in a different setting, that's okay. You've got the equipment in the backpack to do that, and you've got that positivity and mindset that will make you see it as an opportunity and not a downgrade, a sideways step, or a step backwards. It's just something new and something different.
I really like that, having that backpack of the tools to sort of take you forward.
Yeah.
Dubrig, I wonder if I could bring you into this conversation here as well, because I know this is something that you also really work around, that sort of taking your positive step forward, or taking your sort of best experiences and future opportunities forward.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, for those that don't know, Caroline and I've worked together in the past, and she is one of the most resilient, hardworking people I've ever come across. Yeah, absolutely great. And she's an excellent typer. I've never seen anybody blind type as well as Caroline, I have to say, as a complete aside. So those the skills she's learned over time definitely get pulled out of the backpack often, I think. Yeah, not surprisingly, people have been asking, how do I lead my team virtually? How do we stay resilient? And all these things all the time. And what's really interesting, looking at the research, because obviously in the first 6 months, everybody was in kind of almost in blind panic mode and trying to survive. And there wasn't a lot of data, there wasn't a lot of information really on how to survive and thrive and be resilient in a virtual world, because hey, none of us had been there before. And it's really interesting as we enter the second half of last year, there was more research coming out from research bodies and from different industries. And what was quite interesting, but not particularly helpful, was if for the more progressive companies that were already doing this kind of stuff, I think, Lucy and a few of us had the conversations just before we came on. If businesses were already doing some of these things before the pandemic, then it was easier for them to get through this, because guess what you're doing virtually isn't that different to actually doing it in person. It's just a different medium. So I think getting the right culture in place is really, really important. And if that wasn't in place, if the right culture wasn't in place beforehand, there is still the opportunity to do it now. It's a little bit harder virtually, but it's not impossible. And like Gareth said earlier, you can't make your team resilient if you're not resilient yourself. So regardless of how senior you are in your own organisation, your job level or your tenure, it is important to actually start with a bit of self-care, and that's really, really important. And again, that's so much easier said than done. Like everybody else, I think there's a good level of appropriate self-disclosure. There were some times, being a self-employed person last year was really, really tough, and you couldn't see a way out of it. And my plastering and my typing was actually working in the pub trade. But as Charlene already knows, there weren't any pubs to go to. So I run 2 pubs. My first 2 jobs actually were managing 2 pubs, but I couldn't fall back on that because that opportunity wasn't there. So, it's actually starting to think about how do you look after yourself? Where is the self-care in this? And there's loads of resources out there, free resources online. There's lots of papers, there's lots of help. Charlie mentioned about the opportunities that the brewery offered their staff. But it is really important that if we don't look after ourselves, it's almost impossible to look after other people. And if you like, I do have one other slide to share just really quickly, if you'd like me to do that, just to think about what is possible and actually self-assess. Now, I don't have any. Sorry, the RAF are flying over the house. It's going to get a little bit loud. Because I'm in Lincolnshire and there's lots of airfields around here. So on this framework, again, it's another quadrant. I'm not going to apologise for that because it works well. So it's actually thinking about ourselves and the self-care, and like Michael was saying earlier as well about never giving up. And there are times, maybe weekly, maybe daily, sometimes you might find ourselves in each of these quadrants, but it's actually start to think about the appropriate level of energy we've got, maintaining things that maintain your energy, your mental energy and your physical energy as well, but obviously having that positive mindset. Listening to Michael's stories, thinking you're definitely in the top right-hand corner of this quadrant. I don't give it, and you might have come out of it, I'm sure you have, but you've not shared that today. So it's actually thinking about this quadrant where there's high energy and low energy, negative mindset and positive mindset. And I don't want to turn this into like a management course or anything, but hopefully it's a helpful framework to start to think about where you are as an individual, as a leader, and people who and the person who influences other people, but also as well thinking, where the people in your teams are as well. So just on the bottom left-hand side, these are the kind of typical typical behaviors or feelings that you might feel with a negative mindset and low energy. And I've certainly been there. There were so many times last year where I was in this bottom left-hand side, and actually recognizing it, I think you're halfway there, and then you can do something with it. We've all experienced burnout at least once, one day over the last year, and for lots of us, lots of time. And of course, burnout can come from being on furlough as well, because there's nothing stimulating you. There's no energy there as well. So it's not completely withdrawing. It can be burnout because there is no stimulation. There's nothing there to energize you externally, maybe. So the top left-hand side, high energy, negative mindset. where I feel frustrated, defensive, short-tempered. Again, I've been there when the work's not been coming in and you're marketing really hard and you're trying to be really positive. And like Michael said earlier, I'm never giving up. I'm tenacious. I'm going to be resilient. This business is going to work. And then when it doesn't, you get a knockback. You know, it can be quite, you can start to think, wow, why am I bothering? There must be an easier way to earn a living, you know, all these kind of things. And I'm sure we've all been there. And this is kind of where we're getting that surviving mode. But also as leaders of other people, regardless of our seniority, burnout, you've definitely got to do some self-care around that. If you're in this top left-hand side, it's not a good place to be as a leader. So actually identifying that is thinking, right, no, my frustrations, I need to share that carefully with some trusted people, but not with everybody. I can't be defensive. I can't be short-tempered, because that is not a way to lead people forward. You're going to lose people. And one of the phrases I really like about leadership is, you know, to measure leadership, you have to kind of measure how many followers that you've got. And if you haven't got followers who actively want to be following you, then you're not likely to be a leader. You're an influencer within an organization because of your status or your role. So top left-hand side, you know, if you feel that you're surviving, again, start to think about, you know, what support can you have.
I'll just give you a minute to wrap up, Dov. Just the last two boxes.
Yeah, sure. And then bottom left-hand side, this is the space where maybe a lot of us are at the moment. Now we're starting to see some positivity, starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel maybe. So we may be recovering, but that's still quite low energy. Maybe reserve that for the weekends. But, you know, when we're back in work, you start to think about, actually, now how can I energize myself and other people around me? So you do things that support a positive mindset. You do things that give you high energy, that support your mental well-being and your physical well-being as well. So again, no solutions, because of the time that we've got today, no solutions for this, but identifying where you are on this can be really, really helpful, and then getting the support that you need to do that.
I think that's really valuable, actually, Dov. I mean, I consider myself to be top right normally, but I've been all over that quadrant over the last 12 months on almost an hourly basis. Lucy, I wonder if I might bring you in, actually, firstly, any thoughts you've got on, you know, how individuals can stay in that top right hand box if they're able?
Yeah, very much so. That really rang some bells with me. I have a team of HR consultants that I work with. And certainly we were flipping between burnout and surviving with the start of the furlough scheme, for example. It came out, it was a brand new concept, nobody had ever come across it before. And of course, all our clients were ringing us saying, I need to furlough staff, how do I do it? What paperwork do I need? What are the rules? How do I pay? How do I get the grant? And we were, you know, barely a step ahead of them, because it was as new to us as it was to anybody else. And a lot of the way we try to come through that is just sharing knowledge across the team. And trying to pull together a quick guide for ourselves. So as everybody in the team came across a new little nuance in the guidance, we'd share it quickly to make sure everybody was up to speed with it. But that first fortnight of the brand new furlough scheme was possibly one of the most intense periods I think I've had in my entire working career. So I think it was just keeping on top of the information, supporting each other as best we could and getting through it. And a bit like, I guess, Eddie's mindset, every time we know the answer to that question, we're now better than we were yesterday. I mean, there was a stage I remember where the guidance was changing so quickly. I can remember giving a client a piece of advice on a Friday night, and then on the Monday morning having to ring them and say, look, I'm really sorry, it was correct when I told you on Friday night, but now Monday morning it's changed again. But it was just that keeping on top of the mindset and just thinking, you know, I now know the answer to that. I now know the changed answer to that. I'm still just about head on points. But it was all about sharing information. But I think this, sorry, go on, Gareth.
I was just saying, you know, we found that really powerful, both internally and externally. Just I felt more like a press officer over the last year than anything, just constantly pushing out information.
Yeah, very much so. But this session has been really interesting for me, because we do a lot of training for clients around resilience and well-being, and hearing a lot of the messages that we kind of try and share out in theory kind of being brought out in practice here. I mean, I thought, Eddie, your phrase about the broken arm, well, it was an inconvenience. And it's all about that thing about framing, isn't it? That's how you positioned it in your own mind. And so therefore you're able to move positively away from that and think, okay, we'll get through it. We'll go on to the next thing. And I think, Gareth, as well, your story about your daughter and the rosette, she reframed that in her own mind, having seen the film, And that's what we try and get across to clients that we work with. A lot of the issue around resilience is how you frame it in your own mind. You know, it's somebody who is more resilient is somebody that sees a major challenge or a problem as just something to be dealt with, moved on, rather than this is a disaster. People can risk catastrophizing things. It's been a complete disaster, it's a nightmare, things are never going to be the same again, rather than trying to change the mindset and think, okay, this is interesting, this is a new set of circumstances, how can we get through it and get ourselves to a point where next week we'll be in a slightly better position. It's all about that framing side of things.
And I couldn't agree more. You know, it's that whole every cloud silver lining thing. But actually, you mentioned furlough scheme, Lucy. I mean, do you have, you know, what your clients finding are the main worries for employees, you know, as they're transitioning back from furlough or even into a kind of hybrid working from home environment?
Yeah, we're getting so many queries around that at the moment, with employers and managers who are really anxious to know how to help their employees adjust back. And it really struck me, Charlene and I were talking at the beginning before we came on air, and saying it's not just necessarily coming back off furlough into the workplace as you knew it. You could be coming back off furlough into something that has changed beyond all recognition. And so we're having a lot of queries from clients saying, how do I handle that? What do I do? How do I try and help people with that? And what we're trying to say to clients, and one of the points we bring out in some of the resilience training we do, is another factor of resilience, is resilient people are able to focus on the things they can control and try not to worry too much about the things that are outside their control. So putting that in an employee perspective, how much control can you give people in terms of actual facts, things that are actually going to be their experience coming back, rather than worrying about what if the boss does this, what if the workplace looks like that. We had a very good example from one client in a factory environment, and they had an employee who was really worried about coming back off furlough, just worried about their personal safety and worried about picking up COVID. And the manager actually said, well, look, I can see you're really worried about it. Why don't you come in on a day before you're due back? Come in outside a shift. Just come and meet me. There'll be nobody else there. We'll just walk around the site. You can see what things we put in place. You can see where the hand sanitizers are. You can see where we put in the social distancing. And just being able to do that without any degree of pressure, walking straight into the working environment, straight back into the job. The employees said they found that hugely helpful and hugely reassuring, because it took away a lot of the what ifs. Suddenly they felt a bit more control, because now they knew what to expect when they got there. So they just had to think about, okay, how do I get myself to work, get used to the commute and that side of it. So it's really trying to feed employees with facts and information so they know what it's going to look like when they get back, and take a lot of the fear away.
Yeah, we definitely tried to step up communication, you know, about the robustness of the business, about the plans of the business. You know, we run a monthly town hall now, allowing our teams to ask questions to senior management for anything that might be bothering them, you know, trying to reassure that actually, you know, think things aren't too bad. So that's really, really interesting, Lucy. Thank you. Actually, Caroline, I wonder if I might return to you, because, you know, there will be people who, despite their best efforts, you know, find themselves out of work. You know, I think you're a great example of somebody who constantly bounces back better despite the situation. Any tips on bouncing back better?
Definitely. There's a really, you know, I've got probably 4 tips for people to bounce back better. I think the first one is, you know, really think about what your main assets and skill set are. So almost do a personal audit, really have a good look at, you know, what you have that's stacked in your favor. Think really hard about what it is you want to do as well. You know, you don't have to do anything. Think about what would really inspire you, what works with your personal values and your aspirations. Think about where you want to do it as well, because I think that's really important, that you find there's a good cultural fit with where you want to go. And then think about who can help you get there, because, you know, when I lost my job at Thomas Cook, it went into liquidation. I'd kind of really hung on there thinking, I love working for this organisation. I will not try and jump before this one goes. I thought there might be a chance that it would get an 11th hour deal. Sadly, it didn't. But what really helped me was it took me 5 weeks to get employment with AstraZeneca, and I really leveraged my network. So it wasn't what I knew as much as who I knew and how they could help me, but also being courageous, brave and determined to reach out for help when I needed it, to connect with people in a good way, and to take some of those pro bono offers of opportunities when they came up. I was invited to write a blog, an article and take part in a panel interview. I wasn't going to get paid for any of them, but I thought, I have a little time on my hand. This will help my profile and it will help me in the future as well. And it has, it's been marvelous. One final thing. When I was much younger, I read a book at one of these transition points in my career, and it published quite a while ago, 1999, so back in the day, but it's still in publication. I checked before coming online. It's called The Tall Poppy, Creating Real Strategies for Personal and Professional Achievement. It's by 2 authors, Judy James and Mike Eden, and it's all about helping yourself do a bit of a stock check and an audit on your own life. It helps you look at what you want in your work life, your social life, your personal life, and then a bucket list of wishes and dreams as well. And just sometimes writing things down, seeing it on paper, clearing the clutter out of your head can really help you with your resilience, because you start to see pictures, patterns and aspirational dreams, things you perhaps hadn't thought that you could do or wanted to do. And now maybe you've got a bit of free time on your hand. Maybe there's an opportunity you didn't have or something you could do that you weren't able to before. And for me, that's all about what resilience is, looking for those opportunities, preparing for them when they arrive, and being able to reframe a difficult situation into something much more positive. What looks like a closed door could very well be an open one.
Fabulous. A perfect place to end, I think, and bang on 2 o'clock. So I would just like to thank our various contributors. Charlene, thank you so much. Doug, Caroline, Dovrig, Lucy, thank you so much. And of course to Eddie, great to see you again, Eddie. Thanks everyone. I hope that has really been interesting. I found it fascinating and hope to see you on the next one. But enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and let's all be resilient.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye.